As a highly acclaimed academician and a public finance expert of immense standing, he has been instrumental in many of the influential public policy reforms in this country, apart from, or rather more importantly, molding a next generation of public finance scholars in this country. You think of any important committees like the member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, like Finance Commission, you name it, anything. He has been a member of all such important committees in the country. And today I understand that he is holding currently the position in terms of addressing the group of eminent persons to advise the finance minister on G20. You know that India is now holding the chair position of G20. And there is hardly any area of public finance that remain untouched by Professor Govinda Rao. Highly influential publications, and the latest one which we were really privileged to get released it in Gujarat Institute of Finance and Taxation, this copy, the studies in Indian public finance. I know that our PhD scholars are intensively studying it as one of the textbook, rightly so. And they are in fact drawing inspiration from it and locating their way forward. And it is at this juncture that we invited Professor Govinda Rao. And you know, last week he was awarded with the Lifetime Achievement Award of Skok Foundation. And in fact, he has been having so many invitations, but he was kind enough to accept our invitation, come down, and he has agreed to be with you. This is quintessentially a manifestation, or rather an indication of his commitment to profession and his commitment in grooming the next generation of public finance scholars. And this is in fact the vision of this institute. Sir, we are extremely privileged to have you with us. And more than one occasions we have benefited from your affection, your commitment and love towards us. And we look forward to, as a teacher, you are with us, and you are a guide for us. And as a guru of Gujarat Institute of Finance and Taxation, we look forward to have continued patronage, guidance from your side. Over to you, sir, for delivering the first public lecture on this series. The first today, Professor Govinda Rao will be talking about emerging issues in Indian public finance. Tomorrow at 3:30 p.m., Professor Govinda Rao will be speaking on tax policy reforms in India. And the last lecture will be on 14th June at 3:30. That will be dealing with a currently highly important issue of contemporary relevance, fiscal federalism and intergovernmental transfers, theory and practice in India. Sir, over to you for delivering your first lecture. I know that today morning, our former cabinet secretary said, first he told me last week, said that you know everything about public finance. Today morning, he made a remark, he said, you are a library of public finance. Now, I think I would love, you can limit your talk to 45 to 50 minutes because of maximum 1 hour. And because, you know, you have been talking from morning onwards. That is the reason why I'm asking you to 1 hour. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Professor Joseph, for that very generous introduction. You know, things just happen. It's not that, you know, one deliberately does these things. They just happen to happen. We happen to be there at the time and things happen. And of course, the Gulati Institute has always been on my radar. I have been always associated with, even before it became Gulati Institute. And in fact, I had a lot of fond memories of Dr. Gulati. In fact, not just me, at NIPFP when I used to sit, when Professor Gulati used to come and have his discussion with Dr. Chilaya, he would simply walk up to my room. Usually it would be after lunch, around 2:30. And at that time, my daughter would come from her school, and invariably she would come up to my office. And he would see my daughter, and he would know that she would come. And those days in Indian Airlines, they would carry one of those toffees. And he would carry that toffee and give it to her. And so still remembers, she was saying that when I said I'm going to Gulati Institute, it's the same Gulati uncle. I mean, that's that's the fond memories we have. And I have always felt that interacting with the youngsters is an important thing to do. Not just because you want to pass on something, but you can also learn them from something from them. It's not just that, it's always a two-way thing. So the discussion on public finance, of course, in NIPFP, we do a lot of project-related work. But I started, a refresher training program for university teachers. 1 month refresher training program, 4 weeks. So I found money and then paid for that. And, I joined there in 2003. But 2004 onwards, I started this during summer vacation. They would come. I would also give them some allowance so that they can, for their out-of-pocket expenses, to stay in the hostel. And, we did that thing for 10 years. And before I left, I put some 10 crores of rupees in the corpus so that this is continued. But unfortunately, my successors didn't find it very attractive. So it gradually, again, they have got back into the system. So I'm going to be talking today about an overview of public finance, giving you a bird's eye view. I don't know how high the bird is and how much it can see, but I'm going to give you a bird's eye view of public finance, covering a vast area. There are very specific issues which possibly we will not be able to cover, but it's only to open the window so that one can look at things beyond. So let me start straight away. Where is the? Yeah. Okay. This is the one, no? Okay. The screen. Yeah. So what I'll basically, it broadly follows the book that I have written, but then there are some specific issues which I will raise during the course of my presentation. So basically what I'll be doing is the basic thing about public finance. So what is it that the government is supposed to do? In fact, there is a lot of confusion even today. Governments don't do what they are supposed to do, and they do what they are not required to do. Now, any government you look at very carefully, you start asking a question. When you have the technology available and then this thing, should the government be running a telecom? Should the governments be, sort of distributing alcohol? Should the government be running hotels? What is it that they're supposed to be doing? But at the same time, when you also look at it, the following, that do we really have safety and security in the country? Do we really have sort of execution or enforcement of the contracts within a timely framework? So that after all, you see, when somebody makes an investment, he has to be protected for his investment. He has to see that he is not embroiled in a lot of controversy for over a period of time. So cases get, sort of, if you really look at the things carefully, cases get decided after years together. And about 70 to 80% of the cases are initiated by the government itself. Now, that is the question, and that begs the question, is the government supposed to be doing what it is doing? So on both ways, so when you are talking about public finance, financing public that means by the government, that requires what is it that the government is supposed to do? And the government is supposed to do many things. It is supposed to provide public services. Now, public services can be provided by producing or contracting out. It can procure and then, provide public services. But then when you do provide public services, there is an expenditure involved that has to be financed, and then a whole lot of other things follow. But then there are certain cases where the government is an enabler. If the government is an enabler, I mean, apart from providing safety and security and ensuring, sort of enforcing contracts, you also have to show in a good economy that there is healthy competition. A competition which is not predatory. Competition which enhances efficiency. If the competition has to enhance efficiency, and there may be predators in the system, there may be monopolies in the system, oligopolies in the system, you need a proper regulation. Just because there is an oligopoly or a monopoly or there is a dominant producer, you cannot come up and say that, no, I will remove you and then I will start producing. You need regulation. When you are talking about drugs, for example, quality of drugs is very important and therefore we will produce it. And the government will produce. Now, why? That means that you are unable to regulate the person who is producing the thing. Now, so obviously when you are regulating the thing, there is not much of an expenditure involved. Only the regulatory system has to be set up. But when you're producing, there is a lot of expenditure now. So one is the role of the government. The second thing is, what is it that the government is supposed to be improved, in terms of regulation or production? Public finance comes when you provide the public services. So then what the next step is, when you are providing public services, it entails public expenditures. So you come up to the public expenditure. What is the best way to ensure public expenditures? What we call the allocative and technical efficiency in providing public spending. Allocative means between different public services that you want to do. Technical implies that the combination of wages and salaries and goods and services and technology and various other things. So you need to really work on that. So you have a whole lot of issues on public expenditure management and various other things. Now, if you are going to do the public expenditure, they have to be financed. Now, there are public services which cannot be priced. You cannot sell them in the market. People will not reveal the preferences for them. Suppose the defense of the country. You ask her how much defense you want. She said, I don't want any. Simple. Why she says, I don't want any? Because she knows that if she reveals it makes a difference, because she will get it anyway. Since she will get it anyway, so she will not reveal the preference. So if she is not revealing the preference, you cannot charge price on that. So since you cannot charge price on that, and what sort of these public services which cannot be priced, we will discuss that. And these are the things which we call the public goods. So you will have to pay you will have to finance them through taxes. So what is the best way to get the taxes? Kautilya said that the best way of getting taxes is like a bee going to the flowers and sucking the pollen And that is the way the governments have to suck money from the flowers. Now the flowers get fertilized in the process, and you get more production from that. But at the same time, it doesn't harm. So you need to have a tax system which doesn't harm, which doesn't, adversely affect the incentives to work, incentive to save, incentive to make investments. So that is the type of taxes. So obviously there have been a lot of literature on what you call the optimal taxation. Way back in 1920s, Fred Ramsey wrote a paper on optimal indirect taxes. And of course, there is a lot of work that has been done, but that's not the one which we can apply. So, but then we'll have to see what is the best practice approach to levy taxes. So we discuss taxes, but then taxes are not enough. Unfortunately, the government finance ministers are not as good and as clever as housewives. Housewife knows that this is the income I have, and therefore I am going to spend only this much. Whereas the finance minister thinks that she can always borrow. So what are the implications of borrowing? Borrowing today is taxes tomorrow. That means your children will have to pay. You may borrow, but your children will have to repay the tax. If you are not able to produce sufficient goods and services to service the debt and then repay the debt. So then we come to the question of debt. So you have taxes, you have public spending, you have taxes, you have debt. Now again, there are a whole lot of things that have type of public services have to be covered. There are local public goods, state level public goods, and obviously the national level public goods. If everything has to be decided at the center, obviously you don't need a decentralization. But then, what is required for the people? What are the preferences of the people? Public services have to be provided according to the preferences of the people. The preferences of people in Kerala is different from that of Uttar Pradesh. Now, if the central government can decide, get a feeling of everybody's preferences, and then provide, then you can do everything from the center. But center cannot decide where should a particular bus stand be located. Can center decide where the bus stand should be located, where an Anganwadi should be there? So obviously, national level public goods, state level public goods. So you have the whole issue of what are the basic principles of decentralization and what is the efficient way of going about it. And these is covered under fiscal federalism. These are the things that I'm going to basically be talking, and I'll talk about some of the important messages from them. Now, let me say, why should there be a government? This is the first question that we have. And what they should do, even if they have. The role of the government has been a subject of interest for long. In fact, in Arthashastra, written 2,300 years ago, is basically about, it's a treatise on statecraft. And in that, there is a chapter on treasury, sources of revenue, accounts, and audit. So it's as you can go back as that. There's a beautiful article by, in fact, there are two of them, but then both of them are with different titles, by Mansur Olson. It's, Chelaya always used to, when I used to say, he would say Mankar. This is M-A-N-C-U-R. But I had to correct him all the time, saying that it is Mansur. Mansur Olson wrote, in fact, there is a beautiful book. I think any public finance specialist should read that. And book is called The Logic of Collective Action. Now, in fact, Mansur used to tell me that was his PhD thesis. Now, he wrote it in Harvard. Then, in fact, it's one of the most influential books. Possibly, if he had he lived a few more years, he would have got the Nobel Prize for that. he died in his late 50s. He used to tell me, when I asked him, how come you joined University of Maryland? And I mean, he had quite a few competing. Then he said, Govinda, the reason is very simple. I also had an offer from Harvard. I didn't join Harvard because I wanted to increase the average intelligence of both the places. I mean, he's a very generous person, but with a imposing personality, flowing beard and all that. But anyway, that apart, this is a paper which is, and there are two important books he wrote. One is Logic of Collective Action, the other is Rise and Decline of Nations. In fact, the importance of institutions in the growth scenario, in developmental scenario, is brought out in these. I mean, he used to ask a question, why should West Germany grow and East Germany not grow? I mean, that's basically the type of things. I mean, he also had a chapter on India, sort of some section on India, and then basically held caste system as one of the inhibiting factors in the book. But anyway, that part. And we used to have a lot of discussion on that. Let me come to this. There is a beautiful paper in this, and the title is Anarchy, Dictatorship and Democracy. In early 20th century, there were a large number of roving bandits in China. Notorious ones. And since it was infested with roving bandits, there was no incentive to save, no incentive to invest, no growth possible. It is in this context that one of those powerful roving bandits called Feng Yuxian defeated another notorious bandit called White Wolf. But then after defeating him and killed him, he became quite, he was influential. He told the people that, look, let us not get into all this. Now let us settle down. So I will protect all of you, provided you give me a constant share of the income. So they said, fine, at least you see this problem is solved. So from roving banditry, you moved into a stationary bandit. And when you moved into a stationary bandit, or from anarchy, you moved into dictatorship. Now you look at the thing that way. Under him, there was incentive to save, incentive to invest, growth was possible. And when that happens, but then the problem is, Manser uses the word, this growth is not encompassing. Because he has no interest in poor people. He has interest in only those people who pay. So, obviously, one of the major functions that the government has to do, with basically redistribution, is not possible. And therefore, he moves on to democracy. So you have anarchy, dictatorship, and democracy. This is basically it. Now, the thing what I get here from is that there is a basic public good, that safety and security and protection of property rights of the people. Now, this is a public good. You can't do it from, market cannot provide this. You can't say that we don't need the government. So the government has to come in. If the government doesn't exist, you will have roving bandits. Even under a stationary bandit, there is a government. So establishment of a government is necessary to ensure basic public good. The basic characteristic of the public good is that it is non-rival in consumption. Your consumption and my consumption is equal to the total, not your consumption plus my consumption is equal to the total. When you go to a beautiful, sort of municipal park, whether one person goes or 100 people go, they get to see the entire park. My consumption is the total park, your consumption is the total park. It's not that my consumption plus your consumption. Unlike a mango, if you eat, I don't get it. So it's non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. Since you cannot exclude, there is a story of a king who called the people and wanted them to dig a well. And then told everybody after digging the well, that everybody should bring a bucket of milk and then pour it in the well so that from tomorrow we can all take milk. Everybody came and poured a bucket. Next day when they got water. So there was an inquiry that was instituted. And it came out that everybody thought that others are all going to put milk. If I put water, no. People were rational. But so, in other words, what I'm trying to say is, for a public good, people will not reveal their preferences because you can do the free riding. There is a free rider problem. And since you can do the free riding, obviously you cannot levy tax. And therefore, obviously the taxes, compulsory payments come into bear. Manson talks about small clubs. They also provide public goods, but within for a small community. So there you can actually take, sort of voluntary action is possible to collect. In this voluntary action, if a large number of people are involved, voluntary action doesn't help. So obviously it has to be forced. So you say it will have to be taxes. So what are the cases where the government should function? Clearly, existence of a public good is a market failure because markets cannot do it. There are other cases of market failure. Suppose there is a public service which has a very significant externality, education or healthcare. Pico used to say that there should be taxes so that when you have externality, very high degree of externalities, the market, if you are asked to do, it will underprovide the public service. When the market underprovides the public services, obviously, you need to ensure that the subsidy is paid. Suppose there is an environmental problem. So obviously, when you have the negative externalities, you need to bring in the taxes. So for both positive and negative externality, taxes and subsidy program comes into the picture. So in this case, obviously the government has to intervene. Now, the basic thing is, in the case of education, it's not a public good. It's a good with externality, it has significant externalities. Now the government doesn't have to provide it. It can mandate others with a proper set of incentives. But then it's an externality and every poor person should have access to it. Ensuring access to every person is important. That's not necessary that the government should run schools. But then government should have an incentive system which will enable every poor person to access the public service. That's basically the point. So you have provision of public goods, goods with externalities. Now there are varied goods. In fact, when basic work on public goods was done, there's a fascinating story about this. In 1954, Samuelson wrote a paper called The Theory of Public Good. It was in Review of Economics and Statistics. Now, there were two sets of criticisms. One, there were people who were not used to so much of mathematics. They said, you have converted economics into mathematics, we don't understand this. The second thing is that don't try to claim too many things. It is not the public, theory of public expenditure. Eric Linder and Knut Wicksell, two Swedish economists, have already done this voluntary exchange model of public goods. And that was in partial equilibrium. You try to put it in general equilibrium. So there was nothing great that it is an important contribution. We agree. This Samuelson, in fact, came up with in the next issue of Review of Economic Statistics, he comes up, said that I had no access to the Linder, Wicksell work because it was in Swedish. So he got it converted, so translated and then went through. That is indeed the case. So he titled the article as Diagrammatic Exposition of a Theory of Public Good. Diagrammatic Exposition of a Theory of Public Good. Now, so obviously, Musgrave and he used to work together because one is in Harvard and one was in MIT. And Musgrave came up with a slightly different model. Samuelson's model was that, you see, after you had the deficient point, you had a social welfare function which will determine the public and private good distribution between A and B. Musgrave came up and said that there is a sort of, it has to be through a voting mechanism. So we discussed the voting, quite a lot of voting mechanism is chapter 6 of the theory of public finance. So now, but then there is a problem. When Musgrave sees that these are pure public good, but there are lots of things which are provided by the government, which deserve to be provided by the government. What do we do that? How do you really justify what the government does it? Whether education or healthcare or various. So he brings in a concept of what is called the merit goods. In fact, the earliest paper on merit goods was written in 1929 by Musgrave. And this merit goods is a thing where the government considers it, the government of the day, chosen government of the day, a democratic government of the day, considers it is so meritorious that people should be entitled to have minimum levels of these services, and therefore the government should ensure that the minimum levels are provided. In fact, Martin Feldstein calls it categorical equity to goods. In fact, in one of his papers. So you have basically merit goods. Then there was a lot of discussion. There are lots of people. It's already half an hour, is it? Oh my God, I'm still in the introduction. Then, so there was a mid-90s, there was a symposium between Musgrave and Buchanan. Buchanan is a public choice theorist. He thinks that the government is an evil. But then it cannot be expected it's a necessary evil because public goods has to be provided. So there was a symposium between these two people. Opposite views on the role of the government. And this is available in the net, you can get it. In fact, it's a small book, MIT Press, Buchanan and Musgrave. The contrasting views on the theory of state. Where, Buchanan comes up and, I mean, see, when Musgrave was made a presentation, he talked about the merit good, Buchanan says, I don't understand this. I just don't know what it is. This is our preference. He says, redistribution is an important function of the government because the markets don't do. But then it's always better to do the cash redistribution, targeted cash transfers. So that people decide what they want to do, whether they want to drink milk or alcohol, is decided to them. Why are we interfering? How do you know that you are better than them? Basically that's the type of discussion that goes on. So the public choice want a minimal government, whereas people who have a soft heart, like Musgrave, want to have like expanded government. But the question is, all the time we need to ask a question is, should when a particular action is taken up, should the government, what is the benefit for the people, in undertaking this task? Should the government be doing what it is doing? And if you ask that question seriously, many of the things the government does will fall flat. So there are three functions: allocation, distribution, and stabilization. And so finally, when you say that you need to provide public goods, you need to do the redistribution, you need to stabilize the economy, and these things have to be, sort of done through taxes, and you may have to borrow if you have to do a lot of capital expenditures. I talked about this, so I don't need to. We have 1.4 billion people. We have 29 states and 7 union territories. There are wide differences and they're spread across the states. Working age of population in this country is 63%. Low middle income economy, our per capita income according to PPP is 6,592. according to convertible GDP is 1,937. Now, there are wide interstate differences in the country. You have 57% of the people have only 36% of the income in low income states. And there is a table there, one can see that. And states with large population are the low income states. 66% of the poor live in, sort of low income states. And then also, this is important, children in the age group of 0 to 14 constitute 35%. So when you are talking about public finance, you need to keep each one of these things in mind. So 63% of the children are in low income states. So this is basically, I have summarized this. So overall issues in terms of public spending, we have somewhere about 26-27% of public expenditures, central states taken together. Now, if you really look at it, as I said, I will go quickly. There has been a proliferation of subsidies and transfers. In fact, if you really look at it, defense expenditure as a percentage of GDP has been declining over a period of time. And so it's not the public goods. There has been a lot of transfers and subsidies. Actually, by 21-22, you have something like 3.5% of GDP goes by way of subsidies and transfers. Now, social sector allocation is much less. Basically, education and healthcare are the two important things, piped water supply, sanitation. And productivity of public spending, as I said, there is a huge time overrun and cost overrun of projects. Central government monitors it to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. All projects with more than 150 crore outlay is monitored there. And you will see that the cost increases on an average, works out to somewhere about 15%, and time increases somewhere about 10 years. It goes on. So obviously, that means productivity of public spending is low. And obviously, since we have borrowed more and more, interest payments are large. At the level of the central, almost 40 to 45% of the revenue their net revenue simply goes to pay interest payments. And what do we do with other things? And then there is a lot of regional inequality in spending. In fact, if you see the per capita spending on health, it varies from 800 rupees in Bihar to somewhere about 3,500, 4,000 rupees elsewhere. I mean, that's the, in a place like Kerala. So that's the type of distribution that we have. Is it that children in Bihar are the lesser children of God? I don't know. We'll have to ask this question. Now let me go to the taxes. Taxes matter, but they entail incentives. There's, as I mentioned, wherever money is taken, obviously incentives are. You'll be very surprised to know before the tax reform started in the mid-80s, for example, marginal tax rate was 97%, 85% income tax rate, 85% plus 15% surcharge on 87%, which is 97.75%. And on top of it, you had wealth tax. That if somebody earned at the top, he earned 100 rupees, he has to pay 102 rupees by way of taxes. Either he didn't earn, or if he earned, he didn't tell he earned. So tax evasion became a legitimate activity. But anyway, that apart, so, it's Lord Keynes who said that sooner or later it is not the vested interest, but ideas which determine the good or evil of the society. But if you look at the tax policy, it is the vested interest who determine the thing. In fact, it was very interestingly, Johnson and Miles, while reviewing the Merlis Committee report in UK, they were reviewing the review of fiscal studies. He said, in the real world, the proposals for tax reform are constrained by politics. Those who lose from tax reform tend to be vengeful, and while those who gain from them tend to be ungrateful. This can lead to tax policy, perhaps more than any other policy, to a tyranny of status quo. So the 2015 paper in India Policy Forum on tax policy and reform, I titled it as Tyranny of Status Quo, Challenge of Reforming the Indian Tax System. So what are the various? Obviously, the optimal tax policy theory basically tells you you should focus on distortions. Now move towards uniformity and simplicity. Income taxes particularly, sort of basically you need to minimize the three costs: the cost of collection, compliance cost, cost in terms of distortions of the economy. So distortion is equivalent to the square of the tax rate. And if that is the case, obviously the tax rate has to be low. And basically that's the idea. There is a further problem, because when you have very high tax rate, there will be, sort of particularly for capital and capital embodied labor, very high tax rate will lead to a lot of migration. And you will not be, it becomes ineffective. You will not be able to levy the tax and collect the tax. Now, earlier there used to be a lot of focus on Haig-Simon's thing on comprehensive income taxation. And then but then they also talked about, later on, we also talked about the capital taxation. These days, there is even a question of saying that whether we should levy the income tax at all. And in fact, a professor from Berkeley, whom I quote in my paper, has basically gone on to say, when I talked to him, he said, Govinda, you are right, but at the same time, the income taxes must be levied on natural resources because they cannot migrate. So basically that's it. But anyway, steep progressivity in the system is no longer a fashion. Fitness, fairness of tax policy is to be judged from the individual taxes, not from individual taxes, from the tax system as a whole. Now, in fact, and the optimal taxes optimal consumption taxes. The basic idea is, coming from Ramsey, is that, when you levy the tax, there will be, sort of the prices go up and then there will be demand, compression of demand. So the compression in demand must be proportionate across commodities. If that is the optimal this thing. And that basically means that the price elasticity of demand varies across commodities. So depending upon that, you need to levy the tax rate. Now you can have thousands of tax rates because, and then, one is because the price elasticity differs between different commodities. You'd like to, find out what the price elasticity is and then do it. And two, price elasticity of demand is related to income elasticity of demand. Food grains, for example, have very low income elasticity of demand. They also have a low price elasticity of demand. Obviously, if you want to reduce the consumption of food grains, you'll have to levy very high tax rates. So you will get into a very highly regressive tax system. So there's a lot of work that was done. The work that is basically trying to, sort of moderate and this and that. But I don't think any country will follows that. But there have been some empirical studies on the incidence of taxes. In fact, there are a series of time series studies by Peckman and Ochsner in the US, and they have very interesting results. And their conclusion is that with all the things that they had happened, I'm talking about these studies in the early 80s. And even then, they said that the US tax system is not significantly progressive. And I'm sure that is the case here. So therefore, we talk about the best practice approach to taxes: broaden the base, reduce the rate differences, have a simple and transparent tax system, avoid multiple objectives and evolve a simple tax system. Tax policy can make very little impact on changing income distribution. Fairness in taxation should consider the tax system as a whole and not individual taxes. Now, they cannot make very large difference, because if If you levy very high taxes on capital, capital will move away. And then what happens is that the people who are employed by that capital lose their job. Tax on capital might turn out to be a tax on labor. There's a 1956 article by Arnold Harberger in Quarterly Journal of Economics. So you need, obviously, when somebody, if you have very high taxes, if he winds up and goes to some other country because he has this thing, so obviously the employment will be lost. So therefore, what they say is that, are you interested in reducing inequality or poverty? First of all, inequality cannot be reduced much. That is one. But what is your focus? If your focus is poverty, this has to be done through the expenditure side of the budget, not on the tax side of the budget. You need to spend on poverty alleviation programs. Now, not for a moment I am saying that your tax system should be regressive. But then overall, overemphasis on progressivity can be sort of even in the United States and UK in the 1950s, you had a 90% marginal tax rate. They all, after the Reagan reforms, basically this was the moderation in taxation system came up. Responsive tax administration is an internal part of important part of the tax reform. Milka Casanegra, IMF official, she is retired, she used to be in charge of the tax administration cell there. She had a very famous quotation. In developing countries, tax administration is tax policy. So you do need to be very careful about administration. So this is overall, this thing you have, sort of a stagnant tax ratio from 2007-8, it was the highest in 17.5. Now 21-22 is, come close to 17.9. Part of the reason is that in 2021 and 2022, income levels had went down because of the COVID, but the taxes did not commensurately decline. That's one of the things. So what are the basic problems in the tax system? Narrow base. One is obviously agriculture cannot be taxed. Now, a fragmented assignment system in the constitution. Used to have an agreement between the union and the states, and then at least, in Kerala, you don't have large farmers. But then you go to UP, Bihar, Punjab, and all that, you have large farmers. And more than anything else, what they do is that non-agriculture income is siphoned off as agriculture income is tax evasion is taking place. Huge. In fact, Kavita's work in NIPIP showed that you can increase the tax GDP ratio by about 0.6 percentage points. But if you levy that, taxes on agriculture income. If you have, you can give a loss substituting provision, like in the corporate this thing, if there is a problem. But then, well, that's a holy cow. You can't touch it. The major problem is that we consider tax policy as a Kamadhenu. It can do so many things. The simple thing is tax is meant for raising revenue. But what do? We want to give some incentive to save in some instruments. You want small scale industry benefits. You have people to make investments. You want infrastructure development. You want, you have it. You special economic zones. You want to promote large cars instead of small cars instead of large cars. You go on and on and on. Anything you can't do, you ask the tax policy to do. So in the process, what happens is that one, it becomes highly complicated. Two, the tax rates have to be high because your base is narrow. Three, it opens up enormous avenues for evasion and avoidance. So multiple objectives, complicated structures, overwhelming taxes are collected from petroleum products and basic metals. There have been earlier textiles used to generate, but now it's much less. There is another problem that we have, that's from the multinationals. That's what we call the base erosion and profit shifting. Now, most multinationals, particularly some of the digital companies, have their headquarters in tax havens, low-cost jurisdictions or tax havens, where Liechtenstein, sort of various other. Yeah. Now, what happens is that, I mean, this is a problem. A G20 has asked the OECD people to work out that, and OECD people have not been able to come up with a viable solution. There is an organization called ICRIT, Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation. I used to be a member of that. Joseph Stiglitz was a member of that. We used to meet very often. Now, we said that, you see, you take the total profits that, because they have to give to the shareholders, you take the total profits and have an agreement among the countries, allocate the profits according to some objective criteria, either the investment or the employment or the, various other, criteria, and ask each of the countries to levy the taxes. But that would require an agreement. And some countries are not willing to go through the agreement, because US will say that, no, we need the taxes, but at the same time, we don't want to get into the agreement because many of these countries have their headquarters there. So it's like a World Trade Organization. You should have a World Tax Organization, but that is still languishing. That's one of the major reasons why a lot of multinationals don't. And of course, in many of the poor countries, the poor tax administration. And no, I'll take some 5-10 minutes more. Then I will very briefly talk about the goods and service tax, because this is the place, GST place. So there is not much I can say. Of course, after several years. Just before that, I will just tell you one small incident that happened, because not many people know this. In 1993, I happened to write a paper on taxation of services in Asia Pacific region. This is for the Asian Development Bank. It was published in the Asian Development Review. I had a colleague called Arindam Dasgupta, one of the finest and one of the sharpest. There's a book by him and Dilip Mukherjee on tax administration. I think everybody should read that book. Arindam Dasgupta and Dilip Mukherjee on tax administration in India. I mean, this work they did it for the Tax Reform Committee at the time. So I gave this paper, and then we had a beautiful relationship in the institute. If you don't like a paper, you tell on the face. He said, Govinda, the best place for this paper is the nearest trash can. This is not paper you should be writing. This was no, but then I was still not convinced. There was one agreement I had with Dr. Chelaya. Anything I write and I'll send, he had to read. That was the mandate, because he used to give me a lot of work, and then I would. So this is Chelaya, after finishing the Tax Reform Committee work, had moved to the Ministry of Finance as advisor to the Finance Minister to implement the reforms. So what I did is I sent it to him. He said, that is, I want you to see this. On a Friday, he calls me after 2-3 days. He said, Govinda, Monday you come, because we had one car in the institute that had to be booked if an employee wants. So you book the car and you come, and you're going to North Park. You don't get other transport that easily. And I want you to come. I said, okay. I moved there. He said, Govinda, this is a brilliant article. Now I'll give you 10,000 rupees. You write an article on taxation of services for India. I told him, I don't want 10,000 rupees. I will write the article on taxation services, but I'll take my own time, because I had too many things. He said, if you don't want money, you give the money to the institute. It's all right, but you write this paper. I'll give you time. I said, I came back. After a week, he calls and said, where is the paper? So I lost money, I lost time. I mean, that was Dr. Chelaya anyway. He was very. So I said, okay, I will work on that. And he gave one of those excise duty chaps to work with me. We made an estimate and we said, in the seventh schedule, tax powers are given either in the union list or the state list. There is no concurrent list. And this services is not mentioned in either, any of them. So, but then, by default, it goes to the center because anything that is not mentioned in any list goes to the center. So we said that you can do that. And to begin with, you start with 3 services: non-life insurance, telecom, stock brokerage. You will see that in 1994 budget, service tax was initiated on these 3 services. And then they went on exporting. So I am the culprit for service taxation, if you want to call it that way. Huh? No, but that was much later. So this was how the service tax started. In 1990, 99, 2000, they appointed an expert group on taxation services with me as the chairman. And this particular thing, he said, now tax all services, reduce the number of tax rates in excise duties, give tax credit for both goods and services. And then what at the central level, you will have a goods and services tax on, at the manufacturing level. Give concurrent tax powers to the states on tax on services. Give, work out the place of supply rules. Get rid of the central sales tax. You will have a value-added tax when they move over. You will have a value-added tax on goods and services at the repeat level. So the VAT, the GST recommendation first came from the service tax committee, which I headed, expert group on service. And I made a presentation to Vijay Kelkar because he wanted me to make a presentation. So Kelkar used it in the task force in indirect taxes, and Kelkar became the legitimate father of GST. This is the story. So, but anyway, that doesn't matter who did what. But the fact of the matter is that this particular recommendation came from us. Okay, now the GST, we already know much about it. I will not talk about. Obviously, it's neither a gorilla nor a chimpanzee, but a genus like primate. That's the title I gave to the GST, the Gulati lecture. Basic principle should be there should be minimum exemption, reasonably high threshold, not the low threshold, reasonably high threshold. Focus on whales rather than minnows. And then minimize rate differentiation, unique identification number, robust technology platform. These are the basic requirements. Once you get into some bad features, it's very difficult to get rid of them, like we have now in multiple tax rates. We have had a lot of gains from the taxes, and the check posts have been removed. There is a harmonized tax system. There is a reduced tax cascading. There is more efficient supply chain management. You don't need the branch offices any longer to avoid central sales tax. And then, of course, GST Council is an institutional innovation in a country where there is no institutional mechanism for intergovernmental bargaining and conflict resolution. Now, of course, the revenues have not yet, but then of late they have started increasing. I mean, if you see that the top line was 2021-22, I'm sorry, 22-23, which has shifted, in terms of the revenue, in terms of the revenue collections. Now, if you see in terms of the effective rate of tax, it's getting into somewhere about 9.4%. Still, it has to catch up. When I say effective rate of tax revenue as as a ratio of consumption, total consumption, public plus private. Now, gains, unification, simplification, and harmonization of domestic consumption taxes. There have been reduced cascading and greater export competitiveness, abolition of check posts, greater formalization of the economy, better supply chain management, cross verification of income taxes and a paper trail transactions, and then obviously income tax revenue is also likely to go up because of this. Digitization and fast refunds have happened, movement towards a self-assessed tax, e-invoicing to track business-to-business transactions. And I would expect that this year it will be significantly higher revenue because the technology platform has this thing. And that is the reason why we need to do the tax, we need to, I mean, this will show you that, you know, it's a Karnataka data which says that almost 93% of the taxpayers have a turnover of less than 50 lakhs. And their contribution to tax is just about 11%, 7 to 12%. Now, the question is, do we really, sort of, you can keep the threshold at 50 lakhs so that you can focus from there, you can focus on, the larger this thing. Similarly, large list of exemptions we have. There are too many rate differentiation for equity. And equity in a direct sense, not in, for example, construction materials, you have 28% taxes. It gives a lot of employment opportunities. You don't look at the forward linkages. And then anyway, if you have large difference between inputs and outputs, it affects the compliance of the tax. Anyway, I'll skip this. Important conclusion, there is an urgent need for reform. The limit, you can limit the number of taxpayers, but then there is an incentive not to do that because this is administered by the state governments. They would like to have more and more people. That's where the problem is. And 100% matching of the input tax credit is not possible. No country has done it. In fact, Japan tried it, Korea tried it and failed. Simplify the returns to collect only information that is needed. Reform the structure. My numbers show up. It's not here. It basically says that 75% the tax revenue is collected by 12% and 18%. And about 13 to 14% is, at the 28% level. There is certainly a possibility that 12 and 18 can be actually, clubbed together into a middle thing. And if you increase that 5% into, say, somewhere about 7%, and then get rid of the 28% altogether and then bring it into the 16% category, you will have much less of a problem. And then, you can live with two, tax rates. I mean, that's what I intend, sort of. I mean, people are here to talk about deficit and debt. I don't want to talk about it. But at the same time, there is something which is not mentioned is that there is the Lerner-Buchanan controversy. I don't know how many of you really know about it. The Lerner was a Keynesian. He basically said that public debt doesn't involve burden on the future generation. There is a difference between domestic and this thing. The difference between individual and government debt, and there is a difference between external and internal debt. Buchanan said that there is a concept called opportunity cost. And therefore, he had, there is a beautiful book called Public Principles of Public Debt, which basically gives you all this thing. And then he shows that if the public debt that is used is not used properly, then obviously the next generation will have to pay because there is an opportunity cost of this thing. And therefore, there will be, there will be burden on the future generation. And obviously, he said there is no difference between internal and external debt. And he's talking about an open economy, where everything is convertible. And obviously, there is no difference between individual, private and public debt. We talked about the Domer rule. He will tell you what the Domer rule is. And basically saying that if the primary deficit is zero, if your growth rate of the economy is higher than that of interest rate that you pay, then obviously debt will come down. Now, the problem is in the countries like ours, there is a fiscal, as I said, financial suppression, where the government deliberately keeps the interest rate low for its borrowing. And I mean, that creates a lot of other distortions in the system and impacts on the growth. But that part of it, people have not spoken much about. And I think, I mean, except Viral Acharya in his book, basically talks about it's a financial separate system everywhere. Entire fiscal policy is distorted by the financial depression in the system. But anyway, you will see this is the deficits, and then we have reached almost 13%, 13.3% of GDP at the total deficit at the central state level. And that has been brought down to close to 10% in 21-22. Revenue deficit itself is almost 5%. That means, borrowing money 5%, almost, it's substantially used for, current expenditure. And the primary deficit, is basically the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments, which basically means that, you even if you forget your past sins, what is the current sin that you do that you undertake? That in itself will tell you that. So there is a huge problem, but I think, and then of course the Finance Commission has given a fiscal restricting path, which is unrealistic, which is not going to help. They are talking about getting it 86% by end of the, we are already, I think that table is not there. There is a table which shows the debt part, which basically, it's, we have reached almost 90% in 2020-21. That has come down to somewhere about 87% now. And so obviously what you need is much more, much sharper reduction in the debt to GDP ratio. Now, on the transfer system, of course, I will be giving a separate lecture on this, so I don't want to talk much about it. There are first and second generation theories of fiscal federalism. Basically, first generation theories believe in the benevolent state, and the second generation theories, basically see how you can really improve the efficiency in the system. Basically, even in the second generation theories, we are focusing on accountability. And the second set of papers basically talk about, principal agent network in that particular thing. The principal can be people and agent can be government. Principal can be center, agent can be states. There are both sides of sets of studies are there. And the third branch of second generation theories is, the political scientists, they come up with the market promoting federalism. And of course, there is competitive federalism sort of a thing. I'll talk about some of these issues. I'll also talk about, there is so much of a fad on talking about cooperative federalism. It's like a motherhood. It doesn't exist, but we want to talk about it. So there are issues of problems and implementation of intergovernmental transfers as well. There are general purpose transfers, specific purpose transfers. The objectives of general purpose transfers are different from that of specific purpose transfers. We will get into that. So let me give some broad, messages from the work that I have. There is an opportunity cost whenever the state intervenes. It is not that it is costless. When the government comes and gives us, when Karnataka government comes and says that I'll give free bus pass to the women, it's a very desirable thing. But the question, somebody has to bear the cost. Somebody says that, somebody says that I'll give 10 kilos of free rice. You see, that there is somebody else who has to bear the cost. It doesn't come from thin air. So you will have to make a choice. There is an opportunity cost of any policy that you do. There are gainers and losers, and then you need to make the judgment. State interventions are needed only when the markets fail. They should complement the markets rather than competing with the markets. Oftentimes you think we want to compete with the markets. I mean, governments entering into hotels. Now, why? I mean, if you think that they are doing profitably, you need regulation. Instead of that, you say, no. Then you know what happens? You go to a Ashoka hotel in Delhi. You go to every floor, there will be about 15, 20 fellows who are loitering around, along with the cockroaches and other things. I mean, you see, and then nobody bothers about any guest because there is no incentive or accountability. So whatever you do has to be incentive compatible. Need for providing public spending for providing public services. Provision does not mean production. You can buy it and procure it and do it. Focus should be on outcomes rather than outlays. Mobility of capital limits the capacity to tax capital. Equity should be pursued through expenditure side mainly. There are questions of inequality and poverty. You need to really work on that much more. I'm not saying that you should have extreme inequality, but the question is when, I mean, even if you have extreme inequality, you'll have other measures. It's not that the tax will come and do it. In our country, only 3 to 4% of the people pay income tax. When you say that I will reduce inequality, which inequality are you reducing? I mean, it may be cosmetic saying that, I am taxing high, but then whom? So, reduced time horizon prevents, most of the political parties have very reduced time horizon. They don't look at all these issues. There is always a preference on borrowing because everybody wants to spend, nobody wants to levy taxes. And of course, there is a financial repression I mentioned. So borrowing, you think that, people say that, no, it is declining. But then there are other issues that come up. Redistribution is better than through cash transfers. The moment you start subsidizing commodities, you change the relative prices and that creates resultant distortions. Free power in Punjab has actually drained the water table. And in fact, they are facing a very serious problem. There is no water table has gone down because everybody using the free power. So consider the general equilibrium effects of the tax and expenditure policies in calibrating budgetary policy. Simply saying that 28% I will charge on construction materials is a very, very regressive way of going about it. Because construction is a labor-intensive activity. Cement, steel, every one of these things are taxed at 28%. Are you really interested in labor-intensive activity? Huh? No. They are in the process, but what I'm trying to say, why should you have the cement 28%? It's after all, construction industry, the labor intensive industry. Has anybody worked out in a general equilibrium system what is the employment effect of this particular thing? If you work out, in other words, in GST Council, they should have a unit which will have a very enormous capacity to do that. Not that some joint secretaries can sit together and decide what the tax rates are. That is the point that I am trying to make. What do these joint secretaries know about the interdependencies in the system? High mobility of capital and capital embodied labor has limited capacity to tax them, as Harbordhan argues in 1956. Tax on capital might turn out to be a tax on labor in open economies. Equity should be pursued through expenditure side of the budget. Political economy considerations reduce the time horizon in policy making. Preference for borrowing transfers the burden to unenfranchised. That's the next generation of people. Intergenerational equity question. Redistribution, so these are some of the things which I've already said. So nature of public finances depend upon the role of the state. In India, the volume of public expenditure is not very high. 20 to 30% is not a very high volume of public expenditure. But more importantly, political economy factors have distorted the pattern of spending towards wages and salaries, interest payments, subsidies and transfers, crowding out productive expenditures. Volume of spending is constrained by stagnancy of tax revenues. Tax revenues have been virtually stagnant over a period of time. Stagnancy in tax revenues has a serious implications for public service delivery. There's a study which I and Sudhanshu Kumar, we did it. We published in Journal of Asia Pacific Journal of Sustainable Development some 3 years ago, where we took about 120 countries' data on tax GDP ratio and regressed it on per capita income, income from natural resources, because income from natural resources, like for example, Saudi Arabia doesn't have to live with a tax because they have natural resources anyway. Income from natural resources and urbanization, and then worked out. It's over a period of 10 years we have taken the data, and we find that tax GDP ratio for this country at that level of development should be about 19 to 20%. So instead we are leaving the tax at now, 16 to 17%. Anyway, subnational finances are important, but the focus has been on the central budget. Nobody discusses the state budgets anywhere. That's one of the major problems. The pandemic has faced serious challenges to containing deficit and debt and ensuring proper prioritization. This is all that I have to say in this. I'm sorry I have not given any time for you guys to.
Thank you very much, sir, for that. I don't have the proper word, a magnificent public finance 101, Indian public finance 101. I'm not here to repeat what he said, because you have put it in such a way that there's no role for somebody else to repeat, because you have said the major concerns and you have put it conclusion. But nonetheless, the marvelous way in which you have articulated the problematic of when, how, and where public finance and the relevance of public finance only when the market fails. And when the public intervenes, there is public expenditure. And therein you have taken as a marvelous talk in terms of I was very fascinated by when you talked about nut seed, the butcher. And the way in which you have taken us in this whole journey could not have been better. And I'm very sure that I don't want my friends, my colleagues, my students to agree with what you say. No, we are not here to agree. If you are all going to agree what he said, then the public finance is over. Any subject is over. You are here, Professor Govinda said all these things for you to disagree and think through from here. So, sir, you could not have been more provocative. I think we must give him an applause, maybe a 2 round of applause and standing up, I suppose. And we are very much, I think, thank you very much. And, the point is that the canvas that you have set is too broad. And I don't think that this could have been covered anyone could have covered the manner in which you did it in 1.5 of just 1 hour, 40 minutes. So I'm sure you are going to be with us. And my only appeal to my students, my scholars here is, he's here with you. And he came last time when he came, he had health problem. He was not worried about my health problem, his health problem. He was worried that I could not talk to the students. That was his worry. Now that's what he came back. So now the point is, exploit him to the core. He's here to be exploited. Now the floor is open for say a few questions. I think we have another meeting at 5:30.
I
Yeah,
just
so-
want to say one thing. I did not talk much about the public expenditure theories. In fact, on that particular thing, I did not do much. I haven't much discussed this as well. But, you know, on the normative theories, obviously you have public goods theory and things like that, which I referred to. But then there is a whole lot of work on the positive theory of public expenditures. I mean, starting with the Wagner's law. Now, the problem is Wagner's law is not a law. It's a philosophy as in history. If you really want to see a Wagner's law, we should at some point of time reach, there should be 100% government expenditure. You know, so there's a fascinating discussion on that happened, you know, using the cross-section analysis. Shiv Shankar Gupta did a beautiful paper in Finance Archive way back in 1967, testing for the Wagner's law. And it was so severely criticized by Richard Burr, saying that, you know, you can't use the cross-section analysis to do this type of a study. In fact, Shiv Shankar Gupta did two very important papers. In fact, he has done this thing is three important studies. One is economics of scale in local government service, along with John Hutton in the UK. And the other one was this public expenditure and economic growth, a cross-section analysis, public sector and economic growth, a time series analysis. Time series analysis basically, you know, way back in 1965, Alan Peacock and Jack Wiseman came out with a study on growth of public expenditures in UK. In fact, they did it in 1961. The revised version came in 1965. By that time, Shiv Shankar Gupta did his PhD with them, Peacock and Wiseman. And he basically tested that the Peacock-Wiseman displacement effect basically said that in normal times, there are ideas about tolerable burden of taxation and ideas about desirable level of public expenditures. In normal times, you know, desirable level of public expenditure is always higher than the tolerable burden of taxation, and things will not. But if there is a social upheaval, a war, a depression, or any other thing, the tolerable burden of taxation goes up, and desirable level of public expenditures, which were not found to be feasible at the time, become feasible, and there will be a step-like expenditure pattern. And once it goes up, it doesn't come down. It remains there. So econometric testing of that was done by SP Shiv Shankar Gupta. And actually, one of the students of I.S. Gulati, called Dr. Kaipa Narayan Reddy, you don't know him, from Baroda. You know, that's the time. He didn't understand what this particular thing was. So he comes to he didn't do any econometric study, but then he just basically collect a lot of data and then try to see how this thing. He says that during social upheavals, it goes up, but then it comes down to the original level, and therefore there is a displacement effect. No, I mean, you see, if it does. So what Gupta did is, he estimated the shift as well as change in the slope. It happens over a lot of period of time, but then, I mean, that tells you what the thing is. So there is a lot of very fascinating work that is done on, you know, the positive theory of public expenditures. If somebody is interested.
I think what was really marvelous about the lecture was the series of, I would say,
What is marvelous about your lecture was the spontaneous coming out of
highly relevant literature that we should be reading. In fact, for me, it was indeed a treat because I'm very new to this area. In fact, I really, and some of them I heard, but never. It was really a treat, I must say. I, in fact, noted down all. Many of them we'll get for the library, and I think we are recording this lecture, and we'll take it forward. So I think
Anyone has any
some questions you may, and those who are online, you are also welcome. You can either you can put in the chat box. Well, you can always. You are welcome always to come up.
There are a couple of things in the chat box.
You are monitoring from there, sir.
Then I didn't.
Okay. Okay. This is.
From they're talking about the future generation through activities Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund. That's something. That's something you guys have to deal with.
Yeah, we will do.
Because I don't know how exactly it is functioning. Thanks for the excellent lecture, sir. How sooner do you think that the Indian state would shut down BSNL? Shut down BSNL. No, they have to basically ask a question. It is not just the BSNL. They have to ask a question whether the government should get involved in that. In fact, this year itself, BSNL had got another 80,000 crores. And this is basically a political economy, employees pressure, and then basically the government succumbing to that, to protect the employment. Why do you think Kerala is expanding a massive projects like a K phone and reckless looting? That's something which I think.
No, we can discuss these matters.
Yeah, I think Joseph. Joseph should discuss that.
Yeah, we'll discuss
Because
that.
I don't know what is K-phone and.
Someone is coming online. I think we respect somebody who has come online. You can raise questions if you are, apart from.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Vinayakan. I'm a student at the Indian Statistical Institute. So I actually raised the.
What you said? Could you please repeat?
Which institute?
So I'm a student at Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. I'm a virtually a student there. So I'm planning to study a public policy and economics at Bologna, University of Bologna in Italy. And like I was really fascinated by the you quoting Buchanan, Musgrave, and like I've read the book and it was very interesting. And I mean, I'm also a fellow at George Mason University, and all this Virginian School of Thought and Buchanan's work, and you applying that to Indian economy was really fascinating, a really good read to listen to. So I actually raised the previous question. I just wanted to thank you for the marvelous lecture. I was always curious how Indian economists treated and viewed free market. You clearly said it's not absolute free market ideas which you pursue, but like very applied version of it. Thank you so much for the lecture. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to mention to you, since you are a Indian Statistical Institute guy, what you should do now next is, if you want to know a little more about intricacies of public economics and public finance, you should read the book by Atkinson and Stiglitz.
Public economics,
Okay,
handbook.
so lectures in public economics.
Handbook, I suppose.
No, lectures.
Lectures.
Yeah, so you should read that, and that's a very analytically sound. I mean, you will be able to follow.
Thank you, sir.
You're a statistics student, and you're from ISA, so mathematics is not an easy. But what I gave is a simplified version. I didn't want to give since it's a general lecture, everybody should follow a simplified version. But then the right book for you is Atkinson and Stiglitz.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. The students, it's open for you. I think if you have any clarifications, any. Of course, there will be a particular session which we are planning with the Professor Rao in terms of what are the emerging issues, which particularly the new batch you will be interacting with at least 1 hour, 1.5 hours. The third day will be what are the emerging issues. But then if you
There is an interesting episode on this Atkinson and Stiglitz. You know, in 1992, no, 1982, 82, 83, Dr. Chelaya was asked to become a chairman of a International Tax Reform Commission in Zimbabwe. Now, he had seen me doing some work for Pakistan, for the World Bank. And he himself was very impressed. You did it in 2 months. You know, that was the question. So he had gone to Washington. From there, he wrote a letter saying that, you see, I'm being asked to take over this. I want you to come and work with me into Zimbabwe. Anyway, there was a lot of other things that happened, but finally, I mean, I had to go. I had no choice because Raja Chelaya is Raja Chelaya. Now, so we were the only two moving about, discussing, you know, a whole lot of other things. So he said, Govind, in the night I am unable to sleep. No, not unable to sleep. Do you have any good book on public finance or any other? I had carried Atkinson and Stiglitz. So I gave it to him. So he said, next day he said, Govind, it's a brilliant book. He said, why? Then I started saying that, yes, you know, the presentation, you know, I started talking in detail. Hey, no, cut it out. You know, I started reading the book, within 5 minutes, I got sleep. You know, I had a tremendous, as I said, time with Dr. Chelaya. And that's something, I never agreed with him on anything. But then we had a great relationship, I must say.
But it's a very,
I know.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yes, sir. Actually, it is like a storytelling. No, it's very interesting, and from the beginning to end, no, it's very interesting thing. I would like to ask one question regarding the low productivity of public expenditure and the mobilization of resources. See, the government is spending more and more, and the productivity is low, and also the government is spending through borrowing also. So, in which way we mobilize more in this context?
Mobilize more resources.
And mobilize more resources.
But
for,
if there's, you know, if the problem is one of low productivity in spending, you need to deal with the productivity in spending, not in raising more resources. You see, you know, there is a basic question, you know, there is a much larger question. When the markets fail, you have the government coming in and regulating it and doing things. What do you do when the governments fail? You know, when you are talking low productivity, it's a lack of incentive and accountability in the system. If there is sufficient accountability and incentives in the system, productivity will be there. Now, in that case, what you really, in fact, this is something which we talk about when you are talking about deficits and debt. One of the reasons why, you know, sort of, you know, you had the FRBM Act. Things have not worked. Every finance commission comes in and says, and it's so violated completely. Everybody said that there'll be a golden rule, you should not have a revenue deficit, but then revenue deficits persist. So it's a failure of the government. Now it is here that systems and institutions are necessary to prevent this type of failure. That's one of the reasons why we say there should be a fiscal council. You know, like in the case of United States, you have a parliamentary, you have a congressional budget office. In UK, you have, at least you make it much more transparent. You put a report in the parliament saying that this is my target, this is what I have done. And these are, you keep coming, sort of with, so that public knows what your commitments are, what you are doing. Not that it is a silver bullet, but then you need to have systems and institutions to safeguard against the government failure. This is basically the thing. Even here, the reason is, one of the reasons why we have low productivity is the entire spending pattern is incentive incompatible. There is no incentive. Somebody sits in the chair and the chair moves up. Now, obviously, we haven't evolved a system. Now, for example, budget making. If you say that this is the expenditure that a particular department needs for this particular program, then you can monitor that. But if you say last year this expenditure, this year 10% more, then you don't know where you are spending, why you are spending. And that's basically so we don't need it. Resources mobilization, you are right. If there is greater accountability, people are also willing to pay more. If the people know that the expenditure is done very properly, people are willing to pay more because they get better services. But the point is that we have not been able to evolve a system of incentives and accountability.
So, okay. Okay, I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think better you ask. I will ask you.
But I have actually a few questions. I would
I-
like to draw your
two
attention.
questions.
So I'll reserve.
Two questions.
Yes, two. Okay.
Maximum two.
I would like to draw your attention.
Some equity
about,
distribution.
So you talked about Professor Kalturao's study on including agriculture or large farmers into the income tax net. I was wondering, are there higher administrative costs associated with going about that kind of a taxation? One, for instance, we have very heterogeneous yield rates across the country. And so a 10-acre land or a large farmer in Punjab would not be equivalent to semi-arid regions and differences in productivity. So if that is the case, then how do we work out a system that equally brings people into the tax net? That's one question. The one question, other question is somewhat more debated, so I would not want to get into that. But I would like to draw your attention to another thing that you talked about. One is the regional inequalities part. So what we see in terms of data is that we have somewhat a convergence happening in expenditure, especially development expenditure and expenditure on education and health. I'm talking about the regional inequality part. But when we juxtapose the same with outcome, if you take per capita income, there's no convergence happening. So to your own work kind of hinted at efficiency of public spending. I would also like to draw your feedback on whether FRBM in a way led to convergence in public spending. That's because states have drastically cut down spending, and that did it lead to increase in outcomes, say for instance per capita income?
The first one was in agricultural taxation. I would go by step. Getting data and administration is not a huge job, because after all, you have the farm data with the state governments, because obviously registration tells you how much is a wetland, how much is, all that's not a major. You can, there was a Raj committee report there, and then there's an agricultural holding tax and this and that they talked about at that time. So that's not a very serious issue. But to begin with, what you can do is the following. See, they have amended the income tax to say, personal income tax to say, that you've got to declare your agricultural income. But tax will not apply. For rate purposes, it will be applied to determine. So in the income tax return, that is, many of these corporates and various other things, they actually report the agricultural income there. Now, if you haven't, but then the center cannot levy the tax because it belongs to the state. But if you have an agreement with the states, if all the states, you don't have to do anything, we will levy the tax. Let us have an agreement. We will levy the tax on the income that is declared and then give it back to you. This is the recommendation, this is a suggestion I made it to Kelkar. When this discussion took place, I used to be still in ISEC, so he called me to make this thing on service taxation. At that time, apparently that morning itself, they were discussing this particular issue, what do you do? And he put it in the recommendation. The task force on direct taxes has this recommendation. Later, there was such a hue and cry in the parliament that, oh, this Kelkar wants agricultural income to be taxed. So on a private occasion, he said, Govind, you almost lost my job, So that can be the first step. And in the next step, you can basically work out some sort of a presumptive taxation. Agriculture holding tax is a presumptive taxation. Work things out. And on the FRBM front, I have an opposite view. In this country, there are, the explicit transfers is not the only way the transfers happen. There are a huge number of implicit transfers. There is an article of mine in Public Finance, Finances Publics, and came in 1999 or something like that. It's called Implicit Transfers in Indian Federalism. Then one item that I had covered is in that. I did mention about subsidy element in the borrowing. So, I mean, if you compare state bank lending rate with the and then work out the interest payment that is due from different states, you will see that it is the rich income state which have gained enormously much more. Because, I mean, this is even before the FRBM thing. Now, what has happened is 3% of GSDP for, sort of Karnataka is the same as 3% of GDP for Bihar. Now, amount of borrowing Bihar can do at 3% of GSDP is much lower, and the capital investment they have to do is much lower. And the subsidy element that comes with the interest subsidy element that comes is much lower for Bihar as compared to this. This is only one item. When any commodity or service, when you have controls and prices and output, involves a subsidy. Whether it is a food subsidy or a fertilizer subsidy. Food subsidy, who gains? Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana. 80% of the procurement of the food is done there. I mean, apart from the large rodents in food corporation godowns, basically food subsidy. Now you look at fertilizer subsidy. I mean, these are the states which basically use, and basically it goes to the fertilizer companies. But the point is that, so many of these subsidy elements, I mean, if you see, and even, credit deposit ratio. Gurati did a lot of work on, whole lot of, some of these issues. But the basic point is there is a whole lot of other factors which are impeding this. And borrowing, in fact, I have my concern about FRBM is that for us, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Their repayment capacity is much lower, but the requirement is much higher. If they have to catch up with the rest of the thing, they have to do a much more serious, investment, and they don't have the money. And FRBM doesn't allow that. So you have a much more serious dilemma there. That is one of the reasons why, as I said, in the 14th Finance Commission, we gave certain amount of leeway, in terms of repayment capacity. But that doesn't help really. But one of the states which has done well from among these is Orissa. Now, that has done reasonably well because they went into the World Bank for a loan. World Bank people, a lot of wrong things they did, but there are some right things they did. Basically, they asked them to control their debt. Their bureaucrat was, I forget that word. He finally got into the World Bank. He used that particular occasion to get into the World Bank. Sharat Chandran. Okay, now this chap actually told the politician that you can't borrow more than 2% of GSDP. He just put his foot down. And in the process, what happened, their borrowing was less, but then they were able to create more and more revenue surplus. And, some of the things that they have done is well. One is in terms of education, they have done much better. And you will see Varia fellows all over the place, sort of. But anyway, the worst public finance system is in Punjab. Punjab used to be #1 state, and today you see the pathetic, and you'll be very surprised if you see the per capita income levels. The highest, of course, is Goa, next is Sikkim, the third is Karnataka, and the fourth is, Kerala or somewhere about that comes. Haryana.
Income per capita income?
Huh?
We are below Tamil Nadu. We are below Tamil Nadu.
I see. No, but then,
Yeah, this-
no, Karnataka, I'm surprised. That has happened in spite of the government.
Yeah, yeah.
Telangana is going, but then I saw some numbers.
Anyway, what you broadly, what you said is right, only numbers, small difference. That's it. So I was actually thinking,
I think your central message on the first part is the state needs to intervene only when the market fails. If the market can do better, market does it. I would say that's actually a pedagogical scaffolding. In the real world, we cannot presume that this particular principle is not subject to space and time. In 1930s, 34, I suppose, the Bombay Plan, the private sector then itself declared that we are in a state of infancy. We cannot invest in so-called large, lumpy investments. So when we got into political independence, we wanted state to do that. But the point is, they went on doing it. We started making bet. Now the point which I'm trying to say that can be, yes, 2 points. Can we think that this is a universal principle? It should be blindly followed regardless of which country at the stage of development. Is it right? Point number 1. This is the first question. And now I think this is for how will you advise my new generation to articulate this in a better way? I mean, what so that this is. Second point is you said that the tax policy shall not be resolving everything. Yesterday night, I was talking to my daughter. She was telling me that she's arranging her marriage in a hotel in the US. And the first bill last week she told me was something like $15,000. Yesterday she told Chacha, this is the problem, it's 23,000. Why? It is 33% state and central tax. Central and state tax 33%. 33% service on hotel services, So I was surprised. I thought it would be, but if you go to a private, this thing, it will be only 8%. Yeah, yes. No, this is service tax. She is talking about New York. Yeah. This is state specific tax. No, this is talking about New York. Yeah. Whatever it is, 33%. State comes center. The center also has to pay. That's what she told me about. I know that is correct. So now the point I'm trying to say that while you think that tax shall not be, I fully agree with you. Can you tell me any country which is practiced? In any country which is practiced, but you said tax is not used, tax is used not for addressing other, any policy, any state where it is practiced? This is actually normal. I mean, is it that the normative thing or?
My first proposition is not that government should not intervene in this thing. My first proposition is that any policy decision entails an opportunity cost.
Yeah. That's
Okay?
Okay.
Please,
Hmm.
please don't mistake me.
Okay.
There is an opportunity cost. You have got to weigh. You have got to weigh and take a decision whether this is the right thing to do or not to do. And that weighing has to be continuous. It's not one time you do
Continue
this.
time and space. You're right.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's the basic thing that comes out of my thing. Now, as far as you go back to the developmental history of this country. I mean, you go back to your industrial policy resolution of 1948 and 1954. What did you say? Private sector cannot make investment in so many A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Private sector should not do it because I want to take care. I want to see what is the total ultimate consumption of the people at the end of the plan. And for that, in order to achieve that, what I will do is, I will make the investment. Others should not come in. Only if you have a small scale industry, you can do. But then large industry is disallowed. Okay, it was said. So, I mean, you go back to our own history. You say, I mean, in fact, William Baumol once heard, I heard him saying he had visited Amazing. I have never seen any country where it is said that you do not make investment in investments. We did not allow the private sector investment in several areas. And then what happened in the process? So licensing became a major issue. People were selling licenses. And then the entire, the Dhirubhai Ambani's, the movie, when you see, what was the crime? He was trying to have a textile mill of a bigger size. Economic size, so that it becomes more competitive. That is not allowed. Now that particular thing is ingrained in the system. You create a culture. I will not go any further than that. How we have been inimical against the private investment. And we didn't care for the foreign investment. I mean, I'm not saying that others didn't do it. Koreans did it for a while. But then they moved out of it quickly. We did not. We continued. Heavy industry based, import substituting industrialization, a public sector dominated, heavy industry based. So this is all that I have to say on that. And on all the other questions, there are a large number of countries in the world which have very high social security, Scandinavian countries. Now the people in the country want that particular thing. A person is born and he doesn't have to carry anything. He doesn't have to do any saving. State will take care of everything. The tax rate is also high. And they are able to link it. They are able to.
Yes.
Now, the point is, are we able to do it?
We are not. Yeah.
Now, in other words, at the end of the day, these are broad principles, I say.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what actual expenditure takes place and what actual taxation, this thing, depends upon the political dispensation at hand.
Yes.
But then it is our duty to tell our masters that if you do this, this happens. If you do this, this happens. My only job is here to basically tell. I mean, you mean to say that by my telling this, efficiency of public expenditure will increase? No,
You have to say it.
I know, but then I have to say this. So it is not, these are broad universal principles. Now you can, as I did mention that in the 50s, US and UK had a marginal tax rate of more than 90%. There is an article by, I can give in a Journal of Economic Literature by, not Orbach, Joel Slemrod and somebody else. I think this came out in 1996. I will give you the exact reference. I will send you. Basically, reviewing the Tax Reform Act of 1990, no, yeah, Tax Reform Act of 1996 or 1986. That is the Reagan reform. And basically giving a very detailed analysis of Reagan reform on taxes and its impact and various studies. It's a review article. And that, basically brings, the importance of having broad-based, low-rate taxes, broad-based, low-rate taxes. And, if you go, this thing, there is an article, there is a nice little article by Richard Byrd in NIPFP paper series on tax policy, which is, it's easy to read, a fascinating read. Richard was a great writer. He used to pick up, and that's one of the reasons why, I have written 3 papers, collaborated on 3 papers with him. One of them was on urban governance and finance in India. Ishwar Ahluwalia, for her committee, wanted me to write a paper using fiscal federalism background, and then wanted me to collaborate with an internationally known author. So I asked Richard, would you be willing to? He said, Govinda, any day. So I did the first draft and sent it to him, and he did it so beautifully, he presented it so beautifully well. It's one of the I consider that as one of the very good papers. And so when I put it as in alphabetical terms, Byrd and Rao, he sent such a nasty mail saying that I don't believe in this. You cannot do this. It has to go as Rao and Byrd. Anyway, these are all.
I think let's give one more round of clap before asking formally to say the order of thanks. I think otherwise you will keep on talking. We said that we won't make you talk.
No, I have no problem.
But we don't want you straining too much.
Tomorrow you will be concentrating on tax.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is not. Tomorrow is, no, I think we stop at.
You can always ask questions.
Okay.
No, because you see, there was a time when, what is it, gentleman who was, what you said, Gulati, when it was not a Gulati Institute. Pillai. Tan Pillai. I was saying that, see, you cannot have it. He said he wanted to start GST on some commodities. Mind you, they did it. They did it. I said it is illogical, but he wouldn't agree. That on certain commodities.
I think you should write a new book on your stories. This is very interesting.
I think it's always done.
He went to Delhi, no? He went to Delhi.
No, when we went to Ernakulam.
He told me that you invited him to Delhi and he told all the stories. He was very excited. He was very excited. He was very excited to talk about him. And we invited him to come to Delhi. Yeah. Okay.
So, a very good evening to all. And yeah, it was a very interesting and motivating talk. So first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Govind Rao for enlightening us and the way he connected reveal preferences with public goods. It was kind of looking at it in a new way for me because I have started working on public finance only for the last 3 years, and I was looking at it in a rather mechanistic way. So he has opened up a new way of thinking. So thank you, sir. And again, he'll be here for next 2 days. This is for the online participants. You are always welcome to join. And now I'd like to thank Professor Joseph, our director, for inviting him. So, yeah. And I'd like to thank my colleagues and our scholars for being there for all these wonderful activities. And I'd like to thank our IT team, Abhilash and Varun, for seamlessly organizing this hybrid meeting. And last but not the least, the online participants who are there for this afternoon session. Thank you for participating, and Once again, you are welcome to join for the coming 2 sessions, same time. We'll start at 3:30 tomorrow and day after. And thank you all. See you later. Thank you.
I should thank all of you for putting up with this very long